All right, everyone get ready because today we are taking a deep dive into this 30-day Python course plan. We're going to break it all down, find those golden nuggets that'll make learning Python so much smoother for you. And believe me, there are some pretty interesting things in here, stuff I really wish I knew when I was first starting out.
You know, it's funny how many people I see jump into learning a language like Python, and they kind of get stuck right in that first week. They get so caught up in memorizing every little bit of syntax, but they're missing this whole other deeper layer.
That's so true. And this plan actually gets that right out in the open in week one. It's not just, okay, set up your coding environment and learn a few basic commands. Nope. Day 7 throws you right into algorithmic thinking. Now that's where things start to get really interesting.
That's such a smart move. Algorithmic thinking, that's like the heart and soul of programming,
Yeah.
is learning how to take a problem and break it down into steps that a computer can actually understand. Honestly, if you can master that early on, it just makes everything else so much easier.
I'm totally with you on that. It's like you can learn all the grammar rules of a language, right? But that doesn't mean you can just sit down and write a novel. You got to know how to structure a story, how to build characters, how to create a plot that keeps people hooked. Algorithmic thinking, it's the same thing for writing code.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And what really fascinates me about this plan is how it doesn't shy away from more complex stuff. Even in week 2, they bring in functions, file handling, even object-oriented programming. Those are concepts that can be really intimidating for someone just starting out.
Oh, yeah. I definitely remember wrestling with object-oriented programming for what felt like forever. It almost felt like I was trying to learn this whole other language on top of Python. Do you have any tips for making that transition a bit smoother?
One thing that really clicked for me was thinking about objects like they were things in the real world. Like imagine you're building a car. You've got all these different parts, right? The engine, the wheels, the chassis. And each one of those parts has its own specific job to do. Objects in programming, they're kind of like that. They combine data and actions. And that makes your code more organized and way more flexible.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So it's kind of like taking a big, complicated system and breaking it down into smaller, more manageable pieces. And speaking of breaking things down, week 1 also covers all those essential building blocks, right? Variables, data types, operators, control flow. It's like laying the foundation for a skyscraper before you start building up.
Absolutely. And the way they introduce those concepts, it's really smart. It all builds on itself. You start with the basics, things like assigning values to variables and doing simple calculations. Then you move on to controlling how your program runs, using things like conditionals and loops. And by the time you finish week 1, you're already writing code that can actually make decisions and repeat actions.
It's pretty amazing how quickly you can go from knowing nothing to actually writing code that does something. But here's a question that popped into my mind. With so much emphasis on actually using what you learn, does this plan kind of skip over any important theory?
Not really. It definitely puts hands-on learning first, but it still gives you a really solid understanding of those core Python principles. It's all about finding that sweet spot between theory and practice.
All right, I'm definitely sold on week 1. But before we jump into week 2, let's take a quick breather. If you could give one piece of advice to someone who's just starting out on this Python journey, what would it be?
Don't let yourself get bogged down by how much there is to learn. Just focus on understanding those core concepts. Build a strong foundation, and the rest will come naturally. And most importantly, have fun with it.
Some great advice to keep in mind. Okay, let's move on to week 2 and see what new adventures await us. Okay, we're back and ready to dig into week 2 of this Python plan. So we've talked about how week 1 is all about laying a strong foundation, getting those fundamental concepts down. But week 2, this is where things really start to get interesting. We're going deeper, exploring more of what Python can do.
It's like you're moving on from building with Legos to like designing these really complex structures. You've got all these advanced tools at your disposal now. You're not just learning the syntax anymore. You're starting to think like a real Python programmer.
I like that. And it all kicks off with functions on day 8. I remember when I first learned about functions. It was like this huge aha moment for me. Suddenly I could reuse chunks of code, make my program so much more organized. And I didn't have to keep repeating myself over and over again.
Functions are totally a game changer. Absolutely. It's like having those handy kitchen gadgets that make cooking so much easier. Instead of chopping vegetables by hand every single time, just throw them in the food processor, right? Functions are kind of like that. They let you take a set of instructions and package them up so you can use them over and over again. Saves you a ton of time and effort.
And this plan even throws in the lambda function. That always sounded a bit intimidating to me, like something you'd see in a sci-fi movie. What exactly are lambda functions all about?
Think of them as like functions on the go, super compact and efficient. Let's say you need to do a quick calculation, like squaring a number. Instead of writing a whole function for that, you can just use a Lambda function and do it all in one line. Perfect for those little one-off tasks.
Ah, so it's like a shortcut for simple things. I like it. So what else does week 2 have in store?
Well, on day 9, you'll learn about file handling, which is basically how you interact with files that are outside of your code. Reading data from them, writing data to them. It's like opening up a connection to the outside world, so your programs can access and process information beyond just the code itself.
It's amazing to think about all the real-world applications that opens up. I mean, think about all the data that's stored in files, everything from customer records to scientific measurements to like financial transactions. With file handling, you can write programs that analyze that data, manipulate it, even generate new data.
Exactly. And then on day 10, the plan brings in error handling. Now, that might not sound as exciting as Lambda functions or file handling, but trust me, it is super important.
Oh, I've definitely learned that the hard way. There's nothing more frustrating than having your program crash because of some unexpected error.
Error handling, it's kind of like putting on your seatbelt. You hope you never actually need it, but it's there to protect you if something goes wrong. It's all about anticipating those potential problems and figuring out how to handle them gracefully, so your program doesn't just come to a screeching halt.
So it's about making your code more robust and reliable. I'm all for that.
And then we move on to modular programming on day 11. This is a really important concept when you're building larger, more complex programs. It's about taking your code and breaking it down into smaller, more manageable modules, each one with its own specific purpose.
So it's like organizing a huge library into different sections, fiction, nonfiction, biographies, and so on. Makes it way easier to find what you're looking for.
Exactly. Modular programming makes your code so much easier to understand and maintain. And it makes it easier to reuse parts of your code in different projects. Plus, it's great for collaborating with other people. Everyone can work on their own module without stepping on each other's toes.
And then comes the big one, right? Days 12 and 13 are all about object-oriented programming. OOP for short. This is where a lot of beginners hit a wall, isn't it?
OOP can definitely be a challenge. But this plan does a really good job of explaining it in a way that makes sense. They don't just throw a bunch of technical jargon at you. They focus on the main idea behind OOP, which is creating objects that represent things in the real world.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me an example.
Sure, imagine you're writing a program to manage a bank account. In OOP, you could create an account object, and that object would hold all the information about that account, the account number, the balance, and it would also have the ability to do things like deposit money or withdraw money. It's like creating a digital version of a real bank account.
That makes it much easier to picture in my mind. So it's not just about writing lines of code anymore. It's about building these systems that reflect how things work in the real world.
Exactly. And OOP has a lot of advantages. It makes your code more reusable, more modular, and way easier to maintain, especially as your programs get bigger and more complex.
Okay, so week 2 takes us from the basics of functions all the way to the power of object-oriented programming. That's a pretty big leap.
It is, but the plan breaks it down into these nice manageable steps. And then on day 14, they give you a recap of everything and some exercises to try out. Helps you really solidify your understanding of all these concepts.
A recap is always a good thing. So week 2 has really expanded our toolbox, introduced us to some pretty powerful concepts. What's coming up in week 3?
Week 3 is where we level up even more. We're going to get into some intermediate Python concepts, and we'll start working with some super useful libraries. They're going to open up a whole new world of possibilities. Ready to keep going.
Absolutely. Bring it on. And we're back for the final stretch of our deep dive into this 30-day Python plan. We've built that solid foundation, explored some pretty powerful concepts, and now week 3 is here to take our skills to a whole new level. What's in store for us this week?
Week 3 is all about adding some serious firepower to your Python toolkit. We're talking about libraries like NumPy and Pandas. These are the heavy hitters, especially for data science. Oh, and we'll even touch on making your data look amazing with Matplotlib.
Okay, I'm hearing a lot of buzzwords being thrown around here. Can you break it down for me? What makes these libraries so special?
All right, imagine you're trying to analyze tons of data, like thousands, maybe even millions of data points. Doing that manually would be a nightmare. That's where NumPy comes in. It's like your super-powered math partner. It lets you crunch numbers, work with arrays, and do all sorts of complex calculations, and it does it all incredibly fast and efficiently.
So it's like Python, but on steroids for working with numbers, and then Pandas comes in to help make sense of it all.
You got it. Pandas takes what NumPy does and adds these things called data frames. They're kind of like spreadsheets,
Bill.
but way more powerful. You can organize your data, clean it up, manipulate it, analyze it, all with the level of control that would make Excel jealous.
I'm starting to see how powerful this could be. But let's be real, data analysis can sometimes feel a bit abstract. Does this plan just focus on the theory? Or does it actually give you a chance to get hands-on and use these tools in real-world situations?
That's one of the things I really like about this plan. It's all about practical application. For example, day 21 is dedicated to using pandas and matplotlib to analyze and visualize real data sets. So you're not just learning the concepts, you're actually using them to solve real problems.
Data visualization is so important too. It's like taking raw data and turning it into a work of art. You can suddenly see patterns and insights that you might have missed otherwise.
Absolutely. And matplotlib gives you everything you need to create these amazing visualizations. Scatter plots, bar charts, histograms, you name it, matplotlib can handle it.
Yeah.
It's about taking those rows and columns of numbers and turning them into something meaningful, something you can actually see and understand.
Okay, week 3 is sounding pretty epic, but I know you've saved the best for last. What does week 4, the final week, have in store for us?
Week 4 is where we really dive into the deep end. We'll be tackling some advanced Python concepts and working on projects that will really put your skills to the test. We're talking asynchronous programming, decorators, APIs, web scraping, even a little taste of automated testing.
Wow, that sounds intense. Asynchronous programming always seemed like this mysterious thing to me, something only the most experienced programmers could handle.
It can definitely be a bit tricky, but this plan breaks it down into smaller, easier to grasp steps. It focuses on the core idea of concurrency, being able to do multiple things at the same time. Think about it in our daily lives, we're constantly multitasking. Checking email while listening to music, browsing the web while downloading files. Asynchronous programming brings that same efficiency to your code. It lets you handle tasks that might take a while without blocking the entire program.
Okay, I'm starting to see why that would be useful. And what about APIs and web scraping? Those sound incredibly powerful too.
APIs are basically like bridges between different software applications. They allow them to communicate and share data with each other. It's like having a universal translator for the digital world. And web scraping is the art of extracting data from websites. Imagine being able to gather information from hundreds of web pages automatically.
That sounds incredibly useful for research, data analysis, even just automating those boring, repetitive tasks that everyone hates.
Exactly. And this plan doesn't just teach you the technical skills, it also talks about the ethical side of web scraping. It's about using these powerful tools responsibly and respectfully.
I appreciate that. It's not just about what you can do, but what you should do. So what about the projects? Do we finally get to build something cool in week 4?
Absolutely. Days 27 and 28 are all about putting what you've learned into action. You'll start with a smaller project, something like a password generator or a simple calculator, just to solidify those core concepts, and then you'll move on to a more challenging project. Maybe building a data-driven application or even a web scraper.
That's awesome. It's one thing to learn the theory, but actually building something you can use or share with others. That's where things get really exciting.
And the plan doesn't stop there. Day 29 focuses on best practices and documentation. Those are skills that a lot of people overlook, but they're essential for writing clean, maintainable code and for collaborating with others.
Yeah, good documentation can be a lifesaver, especially when you're looking back at your own code months later and trying to remember what you were thinking.
Exactly. And finally, day 30 is all about reflection and looking ahead. You'll have a chance to showcase your finished projects, see how far you've come, and most importantly, plan your next steps in your Python journey.
Because the learning doesn't end after 30 days, right? This plan is just the beginning.
Exactly. This plan gives you the foundation you need to explore any area of Python that interests you. Web development, data science, machine learning. The possibilities are endless.
Wow, this has been an incredible deep dive. We've gone from the very basics to advanced concepts, from writing simple scripts to building real-world applications. I'm feeling super inspired to dust off my Python skills and try out some of these things myself.
That's what we like to hear. This plan really shows you that Python is not only a powerful language, it's also incredibly accessible. Anyone can learn it, as long as they're willing to put in the time and effort.
So to everyone listening out there, whether we're just starting out with Python or you've been coding for a while, I highly recommend checking out this 30-day plan. It's an amazing guide for your Python journey.
And who knows, maybe you'll discover a hidden talent for coding and create something truly amazing. The only limit is your imagination.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Python. We hope you're feeling as excited and empowered as we are. Happy coding, everyone!